Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Very good. So we're going to be covering a special topic today, a very important topic. And before I talk about that, first let me just say again, and you've heard me say this is one of the problems that is caused by the blessing of Vedic culture. Vedic culture is not easy to understand. You know, anyone who thinks it is kidding themselves. I've been studying it for 40 years and I'm still learning. So it's not something that's easy to understand. As a result, of course, in our quick age in which, you know, we want everything explained to us in a 2-minute YouTube video, what we see is that there are so many misconceptions about Sanatana Dharma and so many misunderstandings, etc. This is one of them. The question of why is it that there are these 3 distinct paths in Sanatana Dharma, that is Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism. You know, I think everyone here has probably heard of these various paths. Essentially, Vaishnavas are those who are devotees of Vishnu, Krishna, Narayana, etc. Shaivas are the devotees of Shiva, and the Shaktas are the devotees of Devi or Shakti, Mahashakti, the Divine Mother, many different names. Now, what leads to this being a perplexing conundrum for people is this. Especially the way we have been understanding Sanatana Dharma in our satsangs, the talks that I give, etc. We understand that this is a truly systematic path. You know, there's no guesswork here. There's no human speculation. There's no, well, this kind of came together as a result of the minds of a bunch of people who just kind of had a committee meeting and over the course of history just kind of saw, well, which ideas kind of work, which ideas don't work. That's not how spirituality comes about. That's not how truth comes about. What we have seen is that Sanatana Dharma is indeed a whole, that it is a thorough system, a systematic way of knowing the divine, that it's very philosophical. This being the case, again, how is it that there are these 3 different paths, and what do they mean? Well, this is what we're going to explore a little bit. There are several different kinds of explanations that are given by people in order to explain the presence of these 3 paths, all of which are wrong. These are the 2 that we'll deal with because these are the most prevalent. The first is a type of radical universalism, where you'll hear many people say this, that, well, the reason why there are 3 paths is because, well, they're all really the same, you know, and you can choose whichever one of these deities you wish to worship as the supreme being, and you just follow that path and you'll all achieve the same thing at the end. Doesn't matter if you're worshiping Durga or Shiva or Vishnu. You know, as long as you have a devotion, and that's all that matters is your devotion and your intention, well, you'll all end up in the same place. This is a type of radical universalism, which inherently you can see the flaws with this. No, if your intention is to go to New York, but you're on the road to Los Angeles, you're going to end up in Los Angeles. Intention is not enough. This is maybe one of the few times you'll ever hear me say this. Devotion is not enough. Devotion alone, but devotion in the wrong direction. You know? There are advisors to evil politicians and dictators throughout the world who have immense devotion to that person. You know? But it's a devotion to something evil. So devotion in itself is not going to guarantee that if you're on the wrong path, that somehow, despite the fact that you're on the wrong path and worshiping someone who is evil, devotion alone is not going to guarantee that you'll achieve something good in the end. Because this is a devotion based upon illusion. You know? So all 3 paths are not the same. They do not all lead to the same place because they are worshiping different beings, radically different beings. And this is the principle. We become like that upon which we meditate. Whatever our awareness is focused on, good, bad, or anything in between. Any sort of levels of good, levels of bad, and again, anything in between. What we are focusing our awareness on, we become like unto that. Very simply, our consciousness becomes colored by that which we bring into our consciousness. Very simple to understand. Okay? Now, this being the case, these beings are radically different. If we meditate upon each of these beings, we end up having different results. All right, so that doesn't work. The second explanation that people try to give as to why there are these three paths, Vaishnava, Shaiva, Shakta, is almost literally the opposite. And this is something that academicians, scholars of religious studies and history of religion will often say. And that is, well, the reason why there are these three different paths is because, throughout the course of history, people had their favored deity. And of course, they tried to make that deity the most important deity. So what you see throughout history is these three paths just kind of warred with each other. No, Shiva is the supreme. No, Vishnu is the supreme. No, Shakti is the supreme. And it's just a type of rampant sectarianism. So you see almost literally the opposite of radical universalism. The first people who are incorrect say, well, all these three paths are the same. The other people say the opposite. No, they're all warring with each other, and it's just sectarianism and denominationalism, and people favoring their god or goddess. That is incorrect as well. The reason why that's incorrect is because if we go to the scriptures themselves, to the Vedic scriptures, and to, again, the Vedic scriptures, to the source, what we see is that all three of these paths are mentioned very favorably. They're not at war with each other, not historically. In the last few hundred years, maybe, yes, increasingly you've seen more and more sectarianism, and that's true universally. That as time goes on, you see more and more fighting between people. But again, if you go back far enough, and specifically to the scriptures, what you see is instances of all three of these paths working harmoniously and not being in conflict with one another. Okay, so that theory is wrong. Well, I passed everyone this sheet here that talks about precisely the three Vedic paths. And what we're going to do today is to look at precisely what is the meaning of these three paths within the strictly Vedic context. And what we're going to see is that the truth of the matter is that the three paths do not lead to the same place on the one hand. They are three different paths. However, at the same time, they are all Vedic, and they are all harmonious in that they appeal to different types of worshipers. In fact, right there in that little nutshell, I just gave away basically the gist of my entire talk. But we want to go more in depth into why this is the case and how precisely this works. So let's do this. Let's begin first with Vedanta, with what are called the three reals, the three tattvas. And you've heard me speak about this many times. I mention this in many of my books because it's a very fundamental philosophical foundation of Vedanta and all of Sanatana Dharma. And that is that everything that we see around us essentially breaks down into one of three things. Everything is either Brahman or God, or Atman, individual consciousness, or Jagat, materiality. That which is non-sentient, that which does not have consciousness. Okay? These are the three reals. Now, this is speaking about these three reals in a very abstract, very philosophical sort of way. All right? Now, let's refer to this sheet. Each of these three philosophical reals, these three realities, also correspond to a personality. All right? Brahman is Narayana or Vishnu. All right? Atman, or individual consciousness, is represented specifically by Shiva. And then finally, materiality, Jagat, Prakriti, Pradhana, there are many different names for this. Break down into the personality of Shakti Devi. Okay? And this is how they are to be understood. Now, how is this the case? Well, very simply. And truthfully, we can talk about this for forever, but I'm trying to be very, very succinct here. The primary nature of Brahman is that it is fully transcendent yet immanent, and it is also the source of all things. Okay? Jagat yasya yataha, it says in the second aphorism of Brahma Sutras, that what is the definition of God? That God is that from which all things proceed. Okay? What we have also seen correspondingly is that this also fits, according to the scriptures, the nature only of Narayana. Only Narayana can be said to be fully transcendent, yet at the same time present within all beings as Antaryaman, as the inner witness, which is also one of the names of Narayana or Vishnu, you see. But also, in the scriptures, only one being is termed that being from whom all things proceed. And that being is not Surya, the sun god. That being is not any of the Gandharvas. That being is not Chandra, is not the god of the moon. That being is not Shiva. That being is not Shakti Devi. That being is said again and again and again throughout the totality of the scriptures to be Narayana or Vishnu. Okay? So that is Brahman or Narayana. Now let's go down one level to the level of Atman or Shiva. It is indeed true that now, and this is recent, this is in the last 2,000 years, now you have a sect of individuals known as the Shaivas who mistakenly feel that Shiva is the supreme being. Again, this is rather recent. Recent in the Vedic context, meaning about 2,000 years. For us, that's not recent. But in the terms of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal natural way, that's very recent. That's yesterday. Really, it's been for approximately the last 2,000 years, maybe slightly more, that we have a group of individuals who say that Shiva is supreme. Again, there is no evidence of this in the scriptures. In fact, on the contrary, in the scriptures itself, including Srimad Bhagavata, Mahabharata, and other places, very, very specifically, Lord Shiva himself says that he is a devotee of Narayana. He himself says this. You know, again, due to the brevity of this talk, we don't have time to go through all of the verses from the scriptures. However, my next book that's coming out, the Study Guide to Sanatana Dharma, has all those. Has all of those specific verses where Shiva himself, again, not someone talking about Shiva, Shiva himself says he is a devotee of Narayana. And more, as I point out to people, very simply, whenever you see an image of Shiva, what is he doing? He is sitting and he has his mala and he is meditating. This is the question that always has to be asked by any intelligent person by implication. Upon whom is Shiva meditating? If Shiva is God, well, upon whom is God meditating? Because obviously, quote unquote, God is meditating necessarily upon something higher than himself. So if Shiva is meditating, he is necessarily meditating on something higher. What is that higher? Well, again, Shiva himself tells us. Now, what does Shiva represent? Shiva represents Atman. Shiva represents the totality of consciousness itself. Again, you've heard me say this many times, how in Vedic culture and civilization and philosophy, everything is personified. Everything is seen in terms of personhood. You know, this includes energies. This includes even some philosophical concepts are seen as being personified. Not just impersonal energy, but everything has a will. Everything has a personality behind it. This is what leads to the richness and the beauty of the world around us. That we don't see just Earth. Earth. No, it's Mother Earth. It's a person. Well, in the same way, if we were to think of what is called technically Tatashta Shakti, the totality of individual consciousness itself, that would be personified in Shiva. Okay? And there's so much more to say about this, but maybe more will be covered as we go on to these other terms. Shakti, Jagat. What Jagat is itself primarily in the form of Prakriti and energy, one of God's energies, the external energy of God, Prakriti Shakti. Okay? Shakti, Prakriti or materiality itself, again, is an energy. All energies are personified. In this case, material energy is personified in the form of Shakti Devi. Okay? All right, I think we understand this now. Let's go on. Let's go on through this, this diagram here. And then, of course, you see the margas, the paths. Marga means path. So you see the corresponding paths. One who is interested in Brahman, in knowing that absolute, atato Brahma jignasa, the first aphorism of Brahma Sutras. One who now wishes to inquire into the nature of that absolute, now becomes a Vaishnava. Why? Because that absolute, Brahman, is non-different from Narayana. Okay? Now, We know that philosophy can be very obtuse. It can be very abstract. It can be very intellectual. It can be very almost impersonal itself if we stay only on the philosophical realm. So now, having been given this imperative by Vyasa in the Brahma Sutras, atato Brahma jignasa, now then is the time to inquire into the nature of Brahman. It's kind of like someone coming up to anyone and saying, okay, now, know God. All right, well, okay, that's nice. What does that mean? Who is God? What is God? It's nice to tell someone that. But now, how do we do this? Well, we do this in personal terms. We do this by first knowing what is the nature of that divine, of that absolute. Thus, the one who wishes to know Brahman becomes a Vaishnava, that is one who now wishes to know Narayana, which is the more approachable idea of knowing God. Okay, and now begins to paint the picture of what is God, which again is just too abstract a term. All right. Those individuals, on the other hand, who are aiming toward not so much God realization, but more self-realization, self-inquiry. They tend to be more focused on Atman, on just self, but not anything beyond that. They like the idea, know thyself, and they decided to run with that, but that's it. Not go beyond that to then know God. Those individuals become Shaivas. Those individuals become devotees of Shiva. And again, why? What does Shiva represent? He is the totality of consciousness. So you want to know your own consciousness, your own self? Thus you become a Shaiva, or a devotee of Shiva, who represents self, who represents that consciousness. Okay? Thus we have this famous mantra, Shivoham, Shivoham, which is a Vedic mantra, but which almost no one understands. Who knows the exact literal translation of that? Very simple translation.
I am Shiva.
Yes, very simple. I am Shiva. Now, what does this mean? Of course, it has two meanings. It has the literal meaning, and then it has the more esoteric meaning. The literal meaning is, I am, unbeknownst to myself, a perfected yogi with gray ash all over my body and long dreadlocks, sitting in perfect lotus on Shiva Loka, a different realm outside of the material universe, but not quite in the spiritual domain, who is a perfected being, and who, when I dance, the world ends. That's me. Now, do you think that's the meaning? No, too simplistic. Shivoham, I am consciousness, I am consciousness, I am consciousness. Because Shiva, again, represents the Atman, consciousness. This is a mantra very specifically for self-realization. Shivoham, Shivoham. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's look into the goals. And this is basically what we've been talking about. One who is a Vaishnava is seeking God realization. One who is a Shaiva is seeking self-realization. One who is a Shakta is seeking what? They are seeking to understand, commune with, and control Shakti, or energy, power. This is why whenever you look at the Shakta path, it always involves, for example, Kundalini awakening. It involves opening the chakras. It involves energizing the 72,000 nadis, or currents, rivers of energy that are going through the subtle body. It's all accumulation of power, Shakti, opening the chakras in such a way that we unleash our inner psychic powers, that we gain all sorts of what are called siddhis, or mystic attainments, that we develop the ability to levitate, that we develop the ability to materialize, that we develop the ability to plunge our hand in one river and have it appear coming out of another river on the other side of the planet, etc. These are powers that some yogis have. So, in other words, what Shaktaism involves is indeed power, energy. Okay? So any individual who is especially interested in developing any sort of psychic powers, interested in communing with Mother Earth, but simply for the sake of communing with Mother Earth and not going beyond that, again, appreciating nature, but not the author of nature, that individual becomes a Shakta, devotee of Shakti. All right? So those are the goals of these three paths. Let's go a little bit deeper into the sadhanas of these three paths. For the Vaishnava, for the individual who wishes to know Brahman, interestingly, their path is Ashtanga Yoga. That may come as a surprise to people. You would think I would say Bhakti Yoga, wouldn't you? Well, pure Ashtanga Yoga is Bhakti Yoga. They're non-different. You see, you should know me at this point. What I'm talking about is the Ashtanga the way it was practiced tens of thousands of years ago, when it was in its pure form. So Ashtanga is non-different from Bhakti. They became separated in time post-Patanjali, actually. But previous to Patanjali, the idea was that indeed one practiced the eightfold system, the Ashtanga system, but infused with bhakti, with devotion. So this is why traditionally, when you said Ashtanga, you meant Bhakti Yoga. They were non-different. You know, Ramanuja also had this understanding that, in fact, he made it very systematic. Before you could even attempt Bhakti Yoga, you had to first perfect Ashtanga Yoga. How's that? He was very strict about this. First, you had to perfect the 8 limbs. Yama, niyama, etc. All of these 8 limbs, then you practice bhakti. But even as you're practicing the 8 limbs, they are infused with bhakti in intentionality. You have devotion as you are following the asanas, pranayama, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, etc. Okay? So the path for the Vaishnava is Ashtanga or Bhakti Yoga. For the Shaiva, it's interestingly Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga. You know, it's interesting today, and this has only happened in America, but now, of course, it's infected the world. Today, when people hear the term Hatha Yoga or Hatha Yoga, as they say, Hatha Yoga, they think that means asanas. Every yoga teacher will tell you that, and every yoga teacher is incorrect. Hatha Yoga is its own separate form of yoga, radically separate from Ashtanga. It's its own tradition with its own gurus, its own origination. And who is the founder of Hatha Yoga? If no one knows, let me tell you, with what we've been discussing, you should be able to guess. See where it is on the line. Shiva revealed it. This is the tradition within Hatha Yoga. Okay? Is this coming together for people? Again, we see how everything, if you are patient and if you just put a little bit of understanding into this, it all comes together. It makes sense. Again, there's no depth to which we cannot go. Who is the most important today known philosopher of Ashtanga Yoga? Patanjali, correct? Who is Patanjali? What is his real?
It's a different opinions. Some people think that it's
No, not opinions.
I mean, the way that is.
Who actually is he?
It's a tradition, a group of descendants of people who studied scriptures and concluded and wrote the essentials of what the Sanatana is all about.
That's the atheistic conclusion. That's not the actual conclusion. He was one individual, Patanjali. He was the incarnation of Ananta Shesha. That's who Patanjali was. And he wrote not just the Yoga Sutras, he wrote several other books as well. But who is Ananta Shesha? He is the couch. He literally is the holder of Vishnu. You see? So it's just interesting how even when you trace back the important people in these different yogas, it corresponds. So again, who is the most important person in Ashtanga Yoga? Patanjali. And who is Patanjali? One of the greatest devotees of Vishnu. Who is the founder of Hatha Yoga? It's Shiva, etc. And then finally, as far as sadhana, for Shaktas, for the most part, what they follow is Tantra. Tantric rituals. With, of course, a lot of yoga and meditation and everything also mixed in there. See, this is another thing that's interesting, is that with all these different paths, especially when it comes to practice, you do have a lot of, not so much borrowing, but you have a lot of back and forth. So is it the case that followers of Shakta only do Tantra and they don't also do a little bit of yoga and things that Vaishnavas also do? Of course they do. and vice versa. One of the most important Vaishnava texts is Lakshmi Tantra, for example. So you have a little bit of give and take, where you see a little bit of sharing of various disciplines, but the main focus is radically different. That's the important thing. The main focus is radically different. In the same way that, for example, with Vedic spirituality and Buddhism, do you not see some crossover? Of course. But what is different? The goal. The goal. Do not Buddhists, just like Vedic yogis, also meditate, also do mantras, etc., 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 etc.? Yes. But is their goal the same? Radically no. Well, the same thing with these three paths. Of course, you see some crossover in practice, but the goals are completely different. All right? Let's go on. The scriptures of these three paths. Again, Vaishnava, Shaiva, and Shakta. For the Vaishnava, those individuals who wish to know Brahman, the Prasthana Traya is the most important collection of scriptures. That's a name of three different sets of scriptures. Brahma Sutras, okay, Bhagavad Gita, and Upanishads. These are among the important texts, and certainly not the only, but among the most important texts for the Vaishnavas. If you wish to know Brahman, these are the texts, the scriptures that you focus on. Okay? For the Shaivas, what are called the Shaiva Agamas. The Shaiva Agamas. These Shaiva Agamas are of relatively recent origin, again, roughly 2,000 years ago, and they are an imitation of the Vaishnava Agamas, what are just called the Agamas. Okay, but these Shaiva Agamas are sacred only to devotees of Shiva. They're not Vedic. These are not Vedic texts. Only devotees of Shiva recognize these. Okay? And then finally, for the followers of Shakta, Devi Bhagavata Purana, and again, various tantras that deal very specifically with various aspects of Kali, Durga, different aspects of Shakti, Kundalini awakening, etc. Okay? Very good. So we're seeing this pattern between all three of these different paths. Now, this is the question. Seeing that there are these three different paths, this is the next question that a person must ask. Why? Why are there these three different paths? Well, again, when you break down what is the ultimate concern of each of these individual paths, what you see is a breakdown of human religious psychology, universally. In other words, if you look at human beings as individuals, what you'll see is that for the most part, if they are seriously practicing some form of spirituality, and this, interestingly, regardless of their religion, regardless of their nationality or where they find themselves historically or anything, those individuals will pretty much fall into one of these different paths. In other words, what is a truly spiritual person looking for? Well, they either are looking to develop some sort of psychic phenomena, some sort of psychic power, mysticism, in order to commune with the earth and the cosmic powers that are there within the material realm. Okay? And we see many people like this, specifically today in the New Age movement, for whom that's really all they care about. Let me develop my psychic powers and just have kind of a material spiritual happiness. Prosperity, whatever they want to call it. But talk about God? No, that never comes up. That's their focus. Okay? Then you have individuals for who their goal is very much me-oriented, but in a spiritual sense. I want to know me. I want to know myself. I want to uncover who and what I am. But again, that is pretty much the sole focus. Once in the blue moon, they'll give a little lip service to, well, yeah, God too. But if anything, they'll fall into this trap of thinking that Atman, that self itself, is God. So therefore, who needs to discuss God? Just self-realization is everything. You'll find some people psychologically who fall into that category when they practice spirituality. But then you have those individuals, and of course this is the minority, who are seeking the highest. Who, when they are on a spiritual path, if you ask them, oh, why are you doing this? Their answer is not, oh, Well, I've had a lot of pain in my life, so I just want to try to overcome that, and I want to just have some sort of self-understanding and greater mastery of who I am, and just have happiness. No, that's not their answer. Their answer is, why am I on a spiritual path? Because I understand that I have a source. And more interesting than even knowing myself is knowing that source, because I know if I know that source, I'll know me better than I could just focusing on the me. That is the path of the Vaishnava. That is the path of the individual who truly wants to know the highest, the source of all things, the source of that self, the source of this world, the source of all little baby psychic powers that we can develop, that are nothing in comparison to that source. You see, oh, look at me. Oh, I can levitate 3 feet off the ground. How nice. God is making every single planet in this universe levitate flawlessly. I would rather know that. And then if afterwards I can levitate too, that's nice. That's fun. But let me know that. That's so much more interesting to me. Who is that person who makes literally every planet levitate in its place perfectly, on its course perfectly? You see? So, this is the harmonious genius of Sanatana Dharma, of this Vedic civilization, is that it understands this human psychology, understands, in other words, the differences between people, including even people who are on spiritual paths. It understands they're all different. They're not all seeking the same thing. But that being the case, what do? Do we only reward those who are seeking the highest and say, well, forget about the others? No. What we have are 3 paths for those individuals and have them achieve what they're looking for. But of course, with the idea that ultimately, if they're looking for something lesser, ultimately, they will in time understand the wisdom of searching for that highest. This is what is called grace, the mercy of God. You know, in so many sectarian religions today, of course, it's my way or the highway, you know? Oh, this way or else you're doomed, you know? Follow this narrow path or hell. Well, in Sanatana Dharma, it's no. Follow this narrow path, and yes, it is a narrow path, to know the divine, or else follow that path to know what you want, or follow that path to know what you want. And guess what? You're not going to know the divine, but you will know something. And maybe, hopefully in time, when you have gotten tired of playing with your mystic powers, maybe you will want to know the divine. Then you come to this narrow path, this highest of paths. Paramamarga, the highest of paths. So you see how it's this wonderful combination. And I hope people are beginning to see this, that this is Sanatana Dharma. It's this wonderful combination of hierarchy and mercy for all. You see? The idea in the modern age is, oh, the way we have mercy for all is get rid of hierarchy, get rid of intelligence, get rid of philosophy, get rid of distinction, get rid of difference, make it all quote-unquote equal. Oh, and that's showing mercy to all. In actuality, that's showing mercy to no one, because you've now eradicated the path. Instead, what Sanatana Dharma says is, yes, that path to the divine is very small. But no one is doomed. Because in time, you will enter that very small path. But when you are ready, not prematurely. You see, to put people on that path prematurely, is that mercy? They'll fall off that path repeatedly until they become so discouraged they'll never want the path again. No. This is why we believe in reincarnation. This is why we know that reincarnation is supremely logical. This is why we know this idea of rejecting radical universalism is supremely rational, that yes, there is really one narrow path. It's not a sect. No. It's a path to know that divine. But at the same time, you have as long as is necessary until you are ready for that path. But you're not getting on the path until you're ready. but you have eternity to be ready. So you see this wonderful combination that on the one hand, infinite mercy, but on the other hand, we're not going to treat you like a child. You get on that path when you are ready, but you have eternity to get ready.